Throughout The Sopranos, it's no question that Tony Soprano certainly faces his fair share of antagonists and racks up a lot of enemies throughout these 6 seasons. From the FBI to his mother, his girlfriends, Carmela, and even the handful of rats that we see that attempt to bring Tony and his crew down. Other than himself, there's one antagonist that is arguably Tony's biggest threat, and this is the Lupertazzi Crime Family in New York. But who exactly are the Lupertazzis, what is their family's history, and who are they based off in real life? This is a retrospective look at the Lupertazzis. Before we get started, be sure to click subscribe and click the bell to get notifications on all upcoming Sopranos content. And be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. In the real-life Italian-American Mafia, there is a commission of the 5 families that make up the Mafia in New York City. The 5 families consist of the Genovese family, the Gambino family, the Lucchese family, the Colombo family, and the Bonanno family.
Lucchese, Gambino, Bonanno, Profaci.
Is there something you want to say to me?
The 5 families are basically a board of directors who overview all the crime in America, and those who overview the commission are the 5 bosses of each family in New York City. But specifically, these bosses would overview and prioritize crime in New York City, whether this is during sit-downs to discuss no-show jobs, territories, contracts, divide earnings, and discuss potential hits on made members whose time was up. And throughout The Sopranos, we see this quite often with Tony meeting with New York. And throughout The Sopranos, we sort of are only focused on one of the 5 families in the fictional New York Mafia, with the Lupertazzis taking full focus whenever Tony is doing business in New York. Of course, the Sopranos and or the DeMeos, however you want to look at them, do not count because they do reside in New Jersey, and Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. views them as a glorified crew.
He hasn't really been boss of a family very long.
Family? I told you, they're a glorified crew.
However, there are 4 other families that we don't really know about in The Sopranos. First, there's the Infante family, whose boss is Andy Infante, who is the brother-in-law of Johnny Sack, and brother of Anthony that we see in season 6.
Yes, you still got the 4 other families who could raise a stink. But Andy's my brother-in-law. I have their ear.
There's also the Teresi and Mangano families that only get mentioned briefly during Tony's conflict between his Uncle Jr. during the first season at who should take over the family, and also later in season 1 when Uncle Jr. is in jail after the indictments.
The backing of 2 of the New York families, communicating through their emissary, John Sacramone. We want Johnny Sack, but more than him, we want Mangano and Teresi.
And lastly, there's the Pagliari family that we actually see in the last episode of the series with the character of George Pagliari, the family's boss, during the sit-down to discuss finally eliminating Phil Leotardo. Throughout the series, we watch Carmine and other bosses run the Lupertazzis through the Averna Social Club in Brooklyn. Whether if it's sit-downs with Tony that are discussing who told the joke about John's wife Ginny, the whereabouts of Fat Dom Gamiello, or even sit-downs where Christopher should still wait in the car, they're all happening here at the Averna Social Club. Throughout the Lupertazzis' tenure in The Sopranos, the family goes through 4 bosses. The first being Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. During his reign as boss of the family, his underboss was John Sacramone, as we learn through Tony that Carmine has been boss of the family for over 30 years. Although the Lupertazzis aren't mentioned until the 3rd season, their presence is shown throughout the first few seasons, as Sacramone works as a messenger for New York and The Sopranos, despite The Sopranos being viewed poorly by other families. As we see this during a sit-down where Uncle Jr. wants to tax Hesh, and with John Sacramone present during a dinner where Tony celebrates his anniversary with Carmela. Out of all the 5 families in New York, it's the Lupertazzis that reign supreme at the top of the hierarchy, as their real-life comparison is most likely the Lucchese crime family, as they too are arguably New York's most powerful crime family, and they also reside in Brooklyn, where the Lupertazzis would operate out of as well. In the Soprano world, a world that is filled with modern-day mobsters like Christopher and Tony, who struggle with their mental health on a daily basis, Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is an old-school, self-centered, tough mobster. Carmine became boss of the family during the 1960s, and after the death of his father Giovanni from apparent lung cancer, Carmine was then in line to take over the reins of the Lupertazzi family. In many ways, Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is very similar to that of the real-life Mafia boss in Big Paul Castellano, as both share similar traits throughout their tenure as boss, as the two were very business-minded, opportunistic, and focused on the traditional roots of the Mafia. And Castellano too operated like a businessman and not a gangster, which ultimately was his downfall and the reason why he got clipped. Carmine was most known for inventing the point-shaving scheme between CCNY and Kentucky, and a clip from The Sopranos that truly sums up the character of Carmine is this clip here.
I bet that guy we're talking about is fucking your wife. He can go.
The guy wasn't making him money no more.
And that was Carmine Lupertazzi.
Despite his business-minded attitude, he was a ruthless mob boss by making threats and ordering hits at any time, no matter the occasion. Throughout The Sopranos, there were plenty of heated moments within the Lupertazzi family. It can get confusing with the multiple viewpoints of each situation. The first was the potential hit that Carmine wanted to take out on his underboss John, and vice versa, as John wanted to take out Carmine as well, as the two mobsters never knew how close they were to getting whacked. But it was after Carmine had suffered a shocking stroke later in the series that resulted in his passing and his family going into shambles, as this was the beginning of the end for the Lupertazzis. With the families as boss in the hospital, and an underboss in Johnny Sack who had his eyes on being the boss for years now, things were bound to explode. Because of his father's situation, little Carmine makes the trip up from Florida to see his dad and try and take the reins from John. With his father being the most recent boss of the family and his grandfather before his father, little Carmine felt it was only justice for him to be the next boss of the family. However, John Sacramone disagreed, and this sparked a bloody war within the family. This resulting in little Carmine caving in on John by granting him the next boss of the family, making Sacramone the second boss we would see in The Sopranos of the Lupertazzi family. It was during the war where we saw Capo's Jimmy Patril and Phil Leotardo side with John, and Capo's Rusty Milio and Angelo Gareppe side with little Carmine. Associates like Lorraine Caluso and Jason Evanina, who were connected closely to little Carmine, were then killed out of spite from John for not kicking up to Sacramone. As payback, little Carmine's side decided to reach out to New Jersey and Tony Blendetto, as Angelo and Rusty were close cellmates with Blendetto, as Blendetto got back into the game by whacking Joe Peeps, who was a close associate of John's. However, John then retaliated by stuffing Angelo in the trunk of a car and killing him. But not long after, Tony B decided to take matters into his own hands by killing Billy Leotardo and wounding Phil. Sacramone's tenure as boss was short-lived, as during a business meeting with Tony at John's house, the FBI raided Sacramone's house thanks to Capo Jimmy Patril turning towards the government, and thus proceeded to Phil Leotardo being the family's third boss and being promoted to acting boss while Sacramone was in jail. During Phil's tenure as boss, there were certainly some bumpy roads, whether it was whacking Soprano captain Vito upon discovering he was a homosexual, renegotiating no-show jobs, and decided to stop supporting Ginny financially with John in jail after seeing John cry at his daughter's wedding. At times throughout the series, it felt as the Lupertazzi boss was cursed, with Carmine suffering a stroke, John getting sent away to jail, and then Phil Leotardo being rushed to the hospital for his heart. And with this, Phil Leotardo was recovering from heart surgery. And it was at this time where the Lupertazzis were being controversially ran by their fourth boss, acting boss Doc Santoro. It was during this time where Phil decided to take his health more serious, as he decided to give the job to Jerry Torchiano, a young, healthy young man. Torchiano was Phil's protege. However, he never ended up being the boss of the family, as Doc Santoro had Torchiano whacked during a dinner with Silvio that almost put his life in danger as well. Although he was never officially named boss of the Lupertazzi family, having only been the successor while John was in jail, Phil ultimately decided to make a comeback and take over the family. As he basically had no choice with Billy dead, his protege Jerry Torchiano was dead as well, and little Carmine refused to take the job. As we witnessed Phil officially becoming boss with him whacking Santoro outside a massage parlor, via Paul Castellano style, with plenty of hitmen surrounding the area. While there was plenty of heated moments between the Lupertazzis and the Sopranos throughout their lengthy relationship, with Phil as the boss of the Lupertazzis was where things really turned sour. As with Phil at the helm was where the war between the two families began, as Soprano fans were witnessing its bloodiest season yet, with Phil ordering hits left and right and taking out two of Tony's top guys in Bobby and Silvio, and potentially Tony in the final episode scene cutting to black. In the end, Phil got what he deserved by getting whacked himself by Walden, putting an end to the Lupertazzi family, as the incompetent Butch would then take over the reins with Phil dead. Throughout this series, the Lupertazzis reigned supreme in the Mafia world, whether it was controlling Tony's little family of a glorified crew, taking over the ports, arranging sit-downs, and most of all, costing Tony and his family millions of dollars. They showed countless times just how powerful they were towards Tony and his crew, and it evidently showed in the end, with the Lupertazzis coming out on the winning side of the war, depending on who you ask. It's hard to say what the Lupertazzis and the Sopranos would be like today, with most of their members getting killed during the war. This image here showcases the entire family of the Lupertazzis, made by user RDS77. If you want to pause, feel free to do so. It's a really nice graph that displays the flow of the Lupertazzi crime family. What are your thoughts on the Lupertazzi family? Let me know down in the comment section below. And for more Sopranos content, keep it locked here, right here on this channel.